When NPR producers asked listeners to send in their original recordings for the series Lost and Found Sound, they received one that stood apart. It was from Claudia Siebold of Palatine, Illinois.
What I have is, I believe, a very treasured item. It is a record of a gentleman who was an eyewitness that heard Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address.
That's right. Miss Siebold had acquired an old 78 RPM recording of the voice of William Rathbone. At the age of 9, in 1863, he was in the audience when Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. Here's the recording.
Because as a schoolboy, I was in the little town of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania some 75 years ago, I am privileged to tell you today what I then heard and saw when Abraham Lincoln, the wartime President of the United States, delivered his immortal address at the dedication of the National Cemetery. When it was known that on a certain day in November, 4 months after the battle, that President Lincoln, Old Abe as we boys affectionately called him, was to be in Gettysburg, I was excused from my duties at school and accompanied my family, at least to see the President and perhaps to hear what he had to say. Bright and early the next morning, I was in the center square of the town where the procession was to form for the cemetery hill, where the speaking was to take place. At the head of the procession, preceded by a mounted military band, the first I had ever seen, rode the President. He was mounted on a gray horse of medium size, which accentuated his unusual height, his long legs reaching too near the ground for either grace or good horsemanship. The President was escorted to the cemetery by many distinguished officers of the Army, representatives of foreign countries, military and civic organizations, and the surging crowds of patriotic citizens estimated at 20,000. After the long, eloquent oration of Honorable Edward Everett of Massachusetts, conceded to be the most finished orator of his day, Lincoln arose and with a manner serious almost to sadness, gave his brief address that rang from the hills of Gettysburg around the world and back many times, and will ever continue to reverberate in the hearts and minds of all mankind, where freedom, forgiveness, tenderness, and strength are cherished. During its delivery, with one or two other lads, I had worked my way under the platform and wiggled through the crowd in front until I stood within 15 feet of Mr. Lincoln and looked up into his serious face. A rough board platform 4 or 5 feet high had been built from which the President spoke. Across the front, over the rail behind which he stood, was draped the nation's flag, the Stars and Stripes, Old Glory, as the soldiers gallantly called it. Although I listened intently to every word the President uttered and heard it clearly, boy-like, I could not recall any of it afterwards. But had any of my companions spoken slightingly of it, there would have been a junior battle of Gettysburg then and there. For any hint or intimation that Old Abe, as we affectionately called him, was deficient or delinquent in any respect would have meant a scrap. So deep-seated was our youthful loyalty. Perhaps no address of equal length has been more widely published and translated into more languages than the one I heard given by President Lincoln on that November day 75 years ago. It will bear repetition even now, after more than 70 years and 10 have passed. It needs no eloquence, or I could not attempt to read it to you. Mr. Lincoln said,